Hello everyone and welcome back to JB Still Gaming, and today, well, this is kind of a different sort of video. If you're a fan of my channel, you've probably at least seen the Star Wars movies, and one of my issues with Episode 7 is how do we get from Episode 6 to Episode 7? We are in a universe in this movie where we have a New Republic that's not on Coruscant. We have a group fighting the New Republic that looks a lot like the Empire that's not the Empire, they're the First Order. We have a group of people fighting the people that aren't the Empire that look a lot like the Rebel Alliance, but they're not. They're called the Resistance. And Leia and Akbar are with them and not with the New Republic. And what happened? I want to do a quick video kind of explaining what we know so far that's gone on. We're focusing mainly on the two books of the Aftermath trilogy that are out so far and Bloodline, and this is going to be spoiler filled if you haven't read those books, so you might want to read them first, and if you haven't yet, then maybe this will inspire you to read them. So we're going to cover actually first Bloodline. Bloodline takes place fairly close to Episode 7. Ben has gone off to train with Luke. They're not in the book at all. We don't hear about him turning or anything like that. But it's close enough that Ben's starting to grow up, and we're not too far off of the events of the movie at this point in the story. It seems like the Empire has been pretty much defeated. However, we know very well that something new rises up. But and this book, we eventually get into how that happened. The story of the book basically goes. And we're not going to go over all the characters, all the plot, but just real simply, Leia is kind of the leader of a group within the Senate called the Populists that believe individual planets should have freedom. There shouldn't be a super overpowered central government, a super big central military. And then there are the centrists who believe that the structure should be more like the Empire. The Emperor was bad, sure. But the idea of having a strong leader, a strong military, a strong central government is the only way that things will get done. Because we're at a point in the government, in the Senate, where things just aren't getting done. Much like the American Senate today, where you have two extremist sides who won't work with each other. Nothing can get passed because one side won't support what the other side wants to do, no matter what, even if they agree with it. And just nothing's getting done. So somebody comes, says, hey, we need help. The Hutts have left, but these new crime lords have taken over. Please send help. Leia says, you know what? I'm tired of politicking. I'm going to go. I'm going to do it. This will be my last mission before I retire. Well, things get complicated. For one thing, the Senate passes a bill where they're going to elect a first senator, basically, somebody who has more power than the chancellor had in the New Republic so far, and to really be a strong leader. And that vote actually does get passed because there are populists who do actually want that as well. They just want one of their people to lead it. So they want to have Leia run as their candidate. The centrists can have their own person, and things also get complicated because the centrists are like, hey, we're not going to let Leia go off on this mission on her own and report back things that would only support the populist or whatever. So they send, and I'm going to probably screw up names, but Rinsalum Kesterfo, who is a young up-and-coming guy in the centrist movement, and he has like memorabilia from the Empire all over his office. Leia hates him at first glance because of all this stuff, and he seems real cocky, and he doesn't really know about the struggles of the war and whatnot, or so it seems. So the two of them go off, and as they go through all these series of misadventures, they find out that these crime lords are way more funded than they should be. They eventually find this kind of paramilitaristic organization that seems to be building up, and where's all this money coming from? Well, long story short, they find out that there are centrist planets funding these people, bringing up these crime lords, using these crime lords to make money to fund some sort of military thing. They eventually start to unravel it. And, well, it ends up that, yes, centrists were involved in it, but not this guy who's with Leia, and they want to work together to figure this out. Well, a wrench is thrown in that because Leia is supposed to receive some honorific award. She doesn't really want to go bother with it. She has so much else to do, and sends another senator to receive it for her, and instead of her. And part of it, they open up this little vault that was off of Alderaan, and in this vault is a music box that Bail Organa had wanted Leia to have that also happens to have a message explaining that Vader is her father. Well, this is a big deal because Han and Luke are the only people who know this, and the Senator doesn't want to betray the title she's gotten by revealing this, ends up giving it to the guy who had been working with Leia. And, well, this is a big deal for him because his father was killed by Darth Vader. So he overreacts, gets really angry, thinks Leia's been lying to him, reports it in front of the Senate, and basically Leia doesn't get kicked out of the Senate, but has lost a lot of respect, a lot of power is basically done as far as her political career. Now, eventually this guy feels bad about it, realizes he's overreacted, realizes Leia really is a good person and just didn't want this being public. She isn't her father, obviously, and, as much as this guy wants a strong central government, he had no love for the Emperor and really no love for Vader, obviously, so he starts working with her again, and, well, we find out not just centrist planets, but centrist senators who are actually working with these groups, building up this military, whatever it is, and they decide, hey, if this ransom isn't going to work with us, they basically pin everything on him, make it look like he did everything. He gets sent off to his home planet to be executed after he had reinstated the death penalty, and the Senate's like, hey, we have done everything that we found the guy, we've stopped the conspiracy, everything's over. Of course, Leia knows this isn't true, and a few trusted people around her, like Admiral Akbar, believe Leia and know this isn't true. So here's the problem we have. Leia doesn't really have any power in the government. She knows this threat is building up, and we find out near the end of the book that this threat is actually referred to as the New Order. Basically, there's a group of people, the centrist worlds, the centrist senators, some of them actually want the Empire back again. Not necessarily the Emperor, but that structure of the Empire, and they're building up a military to be able to do that. So this is where we see that at this point in the story, the Empire has been pretty much defeated, but there is a group of people within the Republic trying to basically rebuild the Empire in the image of the Empire, but also in their own image, and it's a group that they call the First Order. Well, and then we see Leia can't get the Senate to do anything about this group, so she basically leaves and forms her own group, and much like we had at the end of episode 3, where a little group of people are like getting together, forming the Rebel Alliance, while the Empire is rising, while the First Order is rising, Leia, Akbar, and people get together and say, hey, we're going to start a resistance that isn't sanctioned by the government, funded by the government, which is why you have a group of rebels that Leia is a part of fighting against this group. Now, why are they not on Coruscant? Well, let's jump back a little bit now to the Aftermath books that take place not too long after Return of the Jedi, actually. Now, why am I talking about these seconds? Well, Aftermath really, Bloodline really sets us up for why we're in Episode 7. These other books, because they happen not too long after Return of the Jedi, Leia just finds out she's pregnant in the second one, Life Debt. So we're not too far along after Jedi. They have some interesting tidbits that may pay off in the future, and not necessarily directly relating to this story. There are some things that directly relate to Episode 7. Probably the main character that leads this group of people that eventually become people that hunt down old Imperial war criminals is Nora Wexley. She has a son, Temmin Wexley, who eventually gets known as the nickname of Snap, who we see as a pilot in Episode 7, the guy with the beard. He was in the Hero series. There's a pop figure of him. So he is also in the books, along with other characters that are hunting, these people down. It doesn't start that way. The first book starts with the Empire still around. They still control Coruscant. They still control many of the core worlds. It's not like just because the Emperor was killed and they lost, the Battle of Endor, that the Empire just fell apart. This was a huge, thousands of worlds. They didn't just die suddenly. They're still around. They're still fighting. But the problem is, much like the fall of Greece, where Alexander's sons fought over Greece, all the powerful people in the Empire are fighting over control and power. The main character we need to know about is Grand Admiral Sloan. She has the largest fleet, the largest naval fleet of the Empire that's still left. And she's trying to run a meeting, bringing these people together to try to get them to agree on something so that they can rebuild the Empire. The meeting doesn't go well. It ends up getting attacked by Nora and these people she's teamed up with. They either kill or capture everyone but Sloan. At the end of the book, we see her go back to her Super Star Destroyer, the Ravager, as far as we know. At this point, the only Super Star Destroyer that's left, and it's probably the one we see destroyed that Rey flies through in Episode 7. 7 on Jakku, but we'll get to Jakku, because we do know the Battle of Jakku happens. We do know the Empire loses badly. That probably largely contributes to the eventual fall of what was the Empire. It talks about that a little bit more in the book Lost Stars, I believe, which is kind of a romance story. It's not super focused on the main story. It's more about the romance in the Star Wars universe. But basically, she goes back to her ship, and there's this guy, Gallius Rax, who was just a fleet admiral, but he was way more than that. All of his records have been redacted. She can't find any information on him, but she knows he was powerful. She knows he worked with the Emperor, and he's kind of behind the scenes running things. He's the power behind the throne. He's trying to, at least he claims, set Sloan up to be the new Emperor, but he's the one pulling on the strings, and Sloan is going along with him because he has the tactical genius, he has the power, the ability, but she's not too sure about him and tries to find out about him and so on and so forth. He's very similar in a lot of ways to Grand Admiral Thrawn. He listens to opera. He's a grand tactician. He doesn't study other people's paintings, but similar in tone at first, but there are definitely some differences, and we'll get into him more in the second book, Life Debt. By the way, Life Debt, way better book than the original Aftermath. I don't think it was rushed as well. Really enjoyable book. I did a review on the first Aftermath and Bloodline. Life Debt, though, really solid, much improved over the first in the Aftermath trilogy. So in the second book, well, this Gallius Rax is trying to have all these machinations, trying to rebuild the Empire, and eventually, after all this stuff happens, he sends Sloan on what he tells her is going to be peace talks. Now, but he also says he's eventually going to attack the planet. It's just a distraction. He's going to use this fleet, and they're going to attack the main planet at the time of the Republic, which is Chandrila. Probably because of these events and other things, the Republic decides to periodically move where their capital is going to be. They eventually move it to the Hosnian system, Hosnian Prime, which is the planet we see blown up in Episode 7 that a lot of people thought was Coruscant. But anyways, on Chandrila, Sloan is there, these faux peace talks, and one of the big things that happens during this story is Han is trying to rescue Chewie, who's been captured, and actually trying to liberate all of Kashyyyk, all the Wookiees. The Empire still controls Kashyyyk and is using the Wookiees as slaves. Well, at first they free this prison where Chewie is in. They haven't freed the whole planet yet, and all these people get freed from the prison, and there's a big celebration going on in Chandrila, both celebrating the liberation of these prisoners and also the peace talks going on. Here's the thing. There were a lot of different people in the prison. One of them was Nora's husband, who had been captured many years ago for being a rebel. Well, things are going, and then all of a sudden, all these people who'd been liberated from this prison go all Manchurian Candidate and just start shooting people. Nora's husband tries to shoot Mon Mothma. She gets, knocks him out of the way, only hits her in the shoulder instead of killing her, but it's just chaos on the planet. And Sloan is thinking, okay, now the attack's going to happen from the Navy, except it doesn't. There is no attack from the Navy. This was basically Sloan is constantly being tested by Rax, and this was the last test, because while I said he was a lot like Grand Admiral Thrawn, he's very different and maybe a little crazy, maybe not, I don't know. There's some implications he's actually falling out a plane that was set in place even before the Emperor was killed, but maybe not. But anyways, so Sloan has to try to get off the planet. The people are going to blame her for this. The problem is her assistant, who the whole while Sloan really trusted, is actually really working with Gallius, and she's really loyal to him more than Sloan. Well, so when she sees this, when Sloan sees this, she's like, this is not the Empire. This is not what the Empire should be built on. Terrorism and this. The rebels do this sort of stuff, not us. She's furious. So her assistant's like, well, you failed the test. You're not okay with this stuff. And goes to try to kill her. All these things happen. She tries to get away from the planet. She does get shot, but she survives. But it looks like she's going to die. When also fleeing the planet is Nora's husband, because, well, he's wanted for trying to kill Mon Mothma, even though he didn't really have any control over it. So they end up on the same ship. He's about to kill her, and he's like, how did you do this to me? What did you do to my brain to make me do this? I didn't have any control over it. And before, he's able to shoot her, Sloan's like, I didn't do this, but I know who did. This Gallius Rax guy. So he ends up healing Sloan's wounds, and Sloan has found out at this point that Gallius is from Jakku originally. So she flies there with Nora's husband, and that's where the book kind of ends. After they get to the planet, then the whole Imperial fleet shows up at Jakku, which is setting up for the Battle of Jakku, which I'm sure will also be talked about in the third Aftermath book. But that's where the big Imperial fleet is now at. Now, here's some big things, though, that we're going to talk about. Some of them may not be big at all, but some little things that happened in this book that may affect future Star Wars. There is this theme where the Empire needs children. One of the people that they get, that Rax is kind of forming this shadow council to run the Empire, is this guy with the name of Hux. You may remember General Hux in Episode 7. He's Hux's son at this point. He's just a boy in the books, but there, and we'll get into more about the Empire and Children thing in a moment here at the end of this, but that's an important thing, and Hux comes into it. There is two kind of very differing factions who seem to have this strong belief in the Force, even though they're not necessarily Force sensitive. One of them are the Acolytes of the Beyond that are mentioned in these books. They basically worship the dark side, worship Vader, they tagging things, Vader lives, all this stuff. I don't know if it has any lead into the Knights of Ren or not, but there is a movement going on kind of worshiping the dark side around the galaxy. And there's also a movement going on kind of just worshiping the Force in general, more the light side, called the Church of the Force, basically. Now, this isn't mentioned too much in the books, actually, but it's mentioned in other things. It seems like Maz Kanata, the orange lady with the big eyes with the cantina / castle thing, she is probably a part of this. They do mention her kind of being able to sense the Force, even though she isn't necessarily Force sensitive. It's hard to explain, but there are people so devoted to it with so much faith in the Force that they seem to have a connection to it, even if they don't have the potential of becoming a Jedi. And actually, this is important to the films. The guy at the very beginning of Episode 7, I believe, is the guy from the Ingmar Bergman, Seventh Seal, who gives Poe Dameron the data stick at the very beginning. Then his village gets attacked and he gets killed. He is a member of the Church of the Force, so they kind of worship the Force. They're real in tune with it in a way, and they seem to seek out, and both sides are seeking out artifacts. The Acolytes of the Beyond are seeking out like dark side lightsabers and stuff. The Church of the Force is, obviously Maz Kanata has Luke's lightsaber, and these seem to be two opposed factions that aren't Jedi and Sith, but something else. Boba Fett's armor is around. Now, whether Boba Fett blasted his way out of the Sarlacc or the ship crashed into it and people worked their way into it to try to get stuff out of the Sarlacc, doesn't really say, but there's a dude wearing it starting a place called Freetown on Tatooine where, he's like a Wild West sheriff where he wants to bring back justice. Just an interesting little tidbit. And here's the last really important thing, and a lot of it is actually leading into this. And I wanted to talk about Bloodline first because that kind of sets up the universe in Episode 7, but this book has a lot of interesting implications, especially this. So Gallius Rax was on Jakku as a child, and the book starts with him seeing a ship flying in. We find out it's the Emperor's personal yacht, which we actually hear about in the Lando Calrissian comic books, which out of all the comics, I recommend that one the most. And so he goes running off to see it. He seems to be living a life very similar to Rey, like he's cleaning parts or whatever, but he wants to see this ship, and he ends up these droids come out of the ship. They're marking off an area. They're digging into Jakku for some reason, and he decides to stow away on the ship. Well, at the end of the book, the Emperor finds him, of course, senses him, and basically is like, again, speaking of the Empire needing children, and it's Gallius who really seems to be saying this. We don't know why, but there's some connection between Gallius as a child and the Emperor, and he basically says, hey, guard this site. There's something very, very important to the Emperor on Jakku. We don't know what it is yet, but he says, if you guard this site, you do it successfully, when I come back, you and I will have a relationship, basically, or I can kill you. So Gallius decides to guard the site, obviously, and then he seems to be some sort of acolyte of the Emperor, something to that effect, and they have some sort of connection. Exactly what that is, I don't know. What is on Jakku, I don't know. But does this tie into Rey? I can't say for certain, but there's something on the planet. It definitely ties into the importance of Jakku, and it's an interesting little tidbit that we get in this book that, there's this guy who was working closely with the Emperor and something very important on the planet. So there you go. There's some random things from the two books of the Aftermath trilogy that are out so far, and really Bloodline that really sets us up for why we're in episode 7. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully that'll help make episode 7 make a little bit more sense as to, why are Akbar and Leia with this group that isn't the Alliance, so on and so forth, and give you some maybe excitement about some other things that may be coming into the movies as we go forward. So thanks a lot for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.